All right, Pat, we're making our way down the line. Season 3, episode 4, entitled Oathkeeper. This is a pretty momentous episode within season 4 for a lot of different reasons, but I found that this damn well might be my favorite episode of this first couple episodes. We haven't even gotten into, like, as Chris loves to say all the time, the meat and potatoes of this season. What are your thoughts before we get started?
Hey, Dom, I think the Talkin TV family will agree with me that Oathkeeper is exactly what we see in this episode. I don't think I have a snarky comment to give today. I think it's a great episode, and I think it's a great name for a sword, to be honest with you.
Absolutely. All that and more on tonight's episode of Talking Thrones. You know, Pat, it's interesting because going into this episode, I was expecting a very similar 4th episode to last season, since this season seems to be following along with, like, kind of the structure pattern that last season set up, where we would kind of get, like, a slow plotting thing all the way up until, like, the last 3 scenes, which would all be awesome and, like, all setting up for, like, major future events that would happen later on. And I gotta say, I was very thoroughly surprised in this, when not only did we get, like, an actually, like, really well written, like, kind of character drama, like, but again, a lot more chess pieces being moved into formation, you know, a lot more, like, setting up for future things that were going to come to pass, a lot of quick resolutions of things that were already set up, and ending with, again, like, a rather unexpected, like, interesting setup for another banger midpoint next week. I don't know, what are your thoughts going into this one?
Dom, I'm still, surprised that I totally missed that Locke came to town at the wall, and then it's the same Locke that works for the Boltons.
It's pretty convincing. I even have written in my notes, he's like, wow, he's very, very convincing as far as how good of a liar he is. Like, he's so good of a liar that he almost makes you, like, forget that he works for the Boltons.
Yeah, for me, I've been hoodwinked like 3 times now, because every time he shows up in the, Night's Watch, I'm like, oh yeah, this is a good fighter, it came out of nowhere. John has some help. And, it's, I don't know why, but I guess, when they go and fight the mutineers and they have the whole, like, kind of switcheroo, I just, for some reason, I never put it together that this was the Locke from Bolton's until this watch through. So, I think it's one of those things where this particular storyline of Locke going to find, Bran and whatnot could have been a little bit stronger, in my opinion, because it doesn't really last that long, and, it's not really 100% clear. There's no real arc to it,
Yeah, well, the interesting thing, like I said, that goes into, like, I feel like the big point that I wanted to bring up before we got into, like, the plot of this episode, because, again, this episode is very succinct as far as how it places its action. I think it's very, very smart. Again, it's all in the writing. This is the 4th episode of the show, written by Brian Cogman, who previously wrote Cripples, Bastards, and Broken Things, what's it called, What Is Dead May Never Die, and Kissed by Fire, which are famously, at least 2 out of those 3 are, in my opinion, 2 of the best episodes of the show ever written. And this guy also, again, writes arguably one of the, again, this season is so jam-packed full of events, you could have your pick of the litter as far as which one is, like, the biggest episode, but he also writes The Laws of Gods and Men, which is the famous Tyrion trial episode. But the biggest, the number one note that I had written at the top of my notes here is, this is, to me, the episode where the differentiation between the books and the show really, really begins, because there are a lot of stuff that I have here. Like, I feel like every other note for, like, everything
hit me with a couple of
well, so for starters, obviously, so you know about the whole Night's Watch mutineer plot. That's completely original to the show. That never happens. The other thing, and this kicks off right with our opening scene in the show when we check in with Daenerys and Essos, is the beginning of the Missandei Grey Worm romance arc, which is a thing that never happens in the books, mostly because of, again, just another notable difference that I feel like also happened in this episode. Some significant age differences, because Missandei, who was a full-grown woman in the show, was only a 9-year-old girl in the books. So needless to say, it would be a little weird if there was some sort of Grey Worm Missandei action going on in the books, to say the least. So that was thing number 1. Thing number 2 that I also had, obviously, the Jaime and Bronn set up, and how that really never happened, because Jaime trains with Ilyn Payne in the books. The other thing also is, if I'm not everything going on with Ollie as well. How this is the follow up with Ollie after his introduction last season, and how they're continuing to sow the seeds that eventually build up to him killing Ygritte. Like I said, a lot of different things that are introduced here in order to, again, puff up, because, again, Storm of Swords, as I said, this season takes up like the last third of Storm of Swords was like that much book page. So like they really have to relish and add a lot of stuff. And I think that unlike some of the later seasons when they really just full on go off on their own and really deviate from the books, the stuff that they have here really helps accentuate the subject matter. And I think really propels it forward. You know, I don't know, Pat, as a non-book reader, does any of that stuff that I just told you mean anything to you?
Yeah, well, I say, Missandei and Grey Worm, having a little bit of a budding romance throughout the show kind of keeps the characters relevant. I think they're fan favorites, and I think, them sort of, having that relationship and having it strong basically, gives the audience at home something to root for. So definitely, the characters are not, this huge age difference in the show, so it totally works. Remember the books are totally separate. You got to view the television show separately from
to
the
a certain
books.
extent. Yes.
Yeah. It's its own property, but obviously it's based on the books. So the only thing you can do is compare, like, oh, the books did it this way, the show did it this way. Do I think one did better than the other? And then you can get a little more critical about it, and hey, the format of books, you could do certain things, in television you can't do them. So it's one of those things where it depends on how analytical you want to get into it. But for the most part, they are separate things. And
absolutely,
in terms of like Bronn and Jaime, again, it's Bronn is a fan favorite, I think, in the show, and to keep him relevant and to keep him playing in the Game of Thrones, he has to be teamed up with someone that's going to remain in King's Landing, and that equals Jaime. So I think they planted the seed pretty early to keep Bronn relevant throughout the series by teaming him up with Jaime, by combining his responsibilities of training him as a one-armed fighter.
So I'm seeing a lot of common similar threads here, which is that ultimately it seems like all the changes that they made from the book seem to be for the purpose of keeping certain fan favorite characters around, versus I know for a fact there are a lot of these characters get much less screen time because Martin loves to make up new characters just as quickly as he can come up with awesome ones. Like I know that Missandei and Grey Worm both have significantly less page time in the books than they do in the show. Bronn, straight up after his final scene with Tyrion, which will actually hit in the next couple of episodes, he just not seen at all in the books. He just straight up leaves. So that to me kind of is like really where it comes down to as far as the distinction between the books of the show, where George R.R. Martin could literally just make up a new character, just throw it in there in order to kind of like replace a previous character, versus Benioff and Weiss seem more intent on like keeping the characters around that we have, at least with the exception of a few. But I feel that's a good segue into like kind of our plot point, where the first major plot point we have of this episode, it's a pickup immediately from the ending of this last episode. Daenerys' conquest of Meereen, it's very similar to her conquest of Yunkai in the sense of where she has Grey Worm go undercover through the sewers. She said, I love that shot of like the Sully going through the sewers. And
so Dom, I think you just came up with a cool spin-off for this show, is Undercover Grey Worm.
Undercover Grey Worm. I'd watch it.
Yeah, basically.
Just for make the entire show like scenes of him infiltrating cities through the sewer, because it's awesome.
Yeah, like every season, it's like, basically he gets delegated to be, sort of his own fighting force, and he's given a task, and he has to basically invade these different, fortresses. And every season is just centered around him, figuring out the lay of the land and basically figuring out how to break into that fort.
I'd watch it.
Hey, listen, maybe the two of us should be pitching at HBO, but no,
maybe we should.
All jokes aside, I think, it's the whole taking a Marine, happens really quickly. It starts off
like relatively quickly.
Yeah, it starts off with Missandei teaching Grey Worm language and how to speak correctly, and I think this was really clever because she's really training him to kind of. It is a training session, but I feel like it's training him to go undercover.
Right.
At least I got that sense. It's like, this is how, potentially you're going to be able to speak to these other people. And at least that's how I read it. And, obviously their relationship is going to continue because Daenerys says like, hey, you'll have to continue it at a later time. But the fact is, really quick, it's like they come in, the slaves are kind of debating what, happened last time. And, Grey Worm just has, his fellow, Unsullied drop all these weapons at the feet. And it's like, well, you got weapons now. And the only people that can give you your freedom is yourself. You have to take it. And, essentially we get this this scene of a master walking through the alleyways, finding written in red paint or blood, whatever it is, kill the masters. And it turns out that basically the slaves are revolting in that moment. And we get a bunch of, like 20-ish slaves kind of with their newfound weapons kind of converge on this guy and kill him. And then it really just cuts to Daenerys in charge of the city.
Yeah. A couple things that I wanted to add to that. Again, like the common seeds throughout this, because this is really just the opener of the episode, right? We really don't get like the moment where Daenerys officially proclaims that she's going to stay in Meereen just yet. The common seeds that I see here are Daenerys and Grey. Daenerys. Missandei and Grey Worm talking about kind of like their shared heritage. If they remember where they come from. Missandei remembers only bits and pieces. Grey Worm remembers nothing. The idea of the slaves, debating, the young versus the old. The young, wanted to revolt, and the old just kind of being contented, just wanted to survive, as well as Daenerys' response to Sir Barristan once she's actually taken over the city. Again, more hints at potentially the Mad Queen coming out. The idea that, she's going to have all of the slave masters crucified on
Remind me again, Tom, how many? 163?
160, yeah, exactly, like 163, something like that.
I don't know. But it's just the way that she does it.
It's a lot.
Yeah, she's just like, Sir Jorah.
Yeah.
Tell me how many people.
How many? And she's like 163. Yeah. She always does that. She loves asking rhetorical questions to her advisors to make a point. Like that has definitely become a thing that Daenerys loves doing. And Barristan, again, could have done a little bit better as far as advising like the specifics of what could have come from this, as we later learn when we meet Krasnys Moresnys, not Krasnys Moresnys, that's the slave master. Oh my god, I can't remember the dude's name now. What's it called? The Myronese guy who ends up coming to her, who she ends up marrying for 5 seconds before he gets killed at the end of season 5. But
yeah, is that next? That's next season, right?
That's next season that she marries him. But that guy comes into the end of this season because his whole thing is like, yeah, you killed my father, and like we had a pretty good relationship with our slaves. As far as like kind of breaking down the differentiation between like, okay, just because somebody's a slave master doesn't make them like kind of a shitty person, and she kind of lumping them all together as far as like, oh, you doing this automatically makes you a bad person. Again, more hints that Benioff and Weiss did have an idea of where they were going to take the Mad Queen storyline. Just in its final execution, definitely not the best. So I just wanted to point those things out first.
Yeah, no, I think Sir Barristan and just that scene could have definitely been a little more confrontational. It's sort of like she just cuts him off, and it's like, yeah, I'm doing it. It's like I meet injustice with justice, and cut to basically everybody being nailed to these mile markers. And it's probably an excruciating death for sure. Like, it's and probably horrific. Like I would almost question. Well, I was going to say, like, I would almost question as a slave, like, hey, she just enabled us to be free, but she just is murdering all these people. Like,
I guess in the sense that where it comes from is a source of wanting to seek justice for the innocents, which we know has been Daenerys' conquest and like kind of primary motivating factor since we were first introduced to her all the way back in season 1, which again, I think it would have been a little bit different if they were adult slaves that you saw nailed to them, but the fact that it was little kids, specifically little girls too, that's the part where it's like, okay, we get where the anger comes from, Yeah,
but also, like, I just wonder, like, is it, going to benefit her in terms of the crowd mentality? Like,
oh, not at all.
The slaves just got freed.
As we come to see from her reign in Meereen, it doesn't benefit her at all. And
But this, I think that's one of the weak points of this particular sequence is like we just see the slaves once they're free, chanting the Misa, the Jar Jar Binks phrase.
A lot of mob mentality
or at least a lot like it. But they're all happy, and she does this kind of horrific thing, and I guess because they just got their freedom and that's what they're focused on. But at the end of the day, you could have had a couple of naysayers who are sort of in Sir Barristan's court, like, hey, this guy is right. Something like that to really amp up the conflict. But that's not really the main part of the season. But I think
that's the thing is I feel like because that is put on such the back burner this season, I feel like we get a few of those scenes in the next season once she's actually made her decision to rule Marine. But because this season is still so much focused on her final conquest of Marine, those scenes are really only done sporadically throughout, and they're really just focusing on wrapping up her arc from A Storm of Swords. Like I said, this very much being the part 2 to the part 1 that season 3 set up. And then once we get into seasons 5 and 6 and we see how her reign goes, that's when we really start to see like, okay, how she's functioning as a ruler, But this is still like she's still a conqueror right now. And so she's still got the conqueror mentality, Moving on to King's Landing. Again, this entire episode should be the people trying to figure out who killed Joffrey while other people are just straight up admitting that they killed Joffrey. But it does kick off.
Oh, that scene was great.
Oh, it's so good. But
no, I'm sorry, but it's
Olenna and Marjorie.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
Olenna is just like, if I have to waltz through one of these gardens again, I'm going to throw myself off the cliff.
Oh, it's incredible.
And they sit down, and it's like, you got to start working on Tommen.
Charming Tommen, yeah.
Yeah, and all this stuff. And then it's like, do you really think Tyrion did it? It's like, I know for a fact.
Yeah. He it's like, he may have, but he didn't. And she had Marjorie.
Yeah.
It's
just so.
And I love that. That's a great tie too, where like, and that scene cuts from the Littlefinger Sansa scene when they're on the boat on the narrow sea, when they kind of have a very similar exchange, where Littlefinger is making so many uncomfortable gestures and stances towards Sansa, like the way that he's touching her. I'm like, just so uncomfortable in hindsight. Just the fact that he very clearly is hitting on her, and she's still naive enough and kind of in the moment of shock of having witnessed both Joffrey's death and then Dantos' death shortly thereafter. But like the parallel back and forth between those two scenes, as far as like kind of both the killers admitting to and I think this is really interesting too. They're only admitting it to other people who could potentially be implicated, because Olenna knows if anybody were to find, especially if Cersei were to find out that the Tyrells were to blame, Marjorie could be implicated just as much, just as the way that Littlefinger knows that Cersei already blames Sansa for having a part in the death. So he knows, okay, if anybody were to find out, always more shouldering the blame, and kind of like the difference between that. But I thought that parallel, that cutting there was brilliantly done.
Yeah, but Littlefinger is, definitely trying to use Sansa as, part of his, basically,
right, his grand overall
his
plan
grasp for power,
take everything. Yeah.
So like the fact that he felt like he had to clue her in a little bit, and I think ultimately the idea of her being, married into the house of Bolton is so that, I think he probably thought that she would hate being married to Ramsay Bolton, to the point where like he could later conspire with her to kill the Boltons and take back Winterfell, and then cement his power.
There could be some potential there as far as that goes.
Yeah,
but again,
we don't know what his further.
We have no
plot
idea,
would
because
be,
again, that just that to me, that decision to me is the beginning of the end for Littlefinger. But at the very least, for right now, as he says, he's like, look, and because Sansa says it's like, why the Lannisters gave you everything? Why would you make this move against them? And he's like, the Lannisters
confusion.
He's like, you want to take power, keep your enemies confused. And I love how it's again continuing to emphasize this idea. Again, we didn't really get to spend that much time with Littlefinger in the second half of season 3. So now that he's back, he's kind of re-emphasizing his plan. And like I said, if this season is kind of the beginning of Act 2 of the show, soft reboot is kind of re-emphasizing it. We're kind of being clued more into his plan as far as like, again, in this world where ultimate power is the only gain, everybody is your enemy. And so if everybody is your enemy, then nobody can suspect when you're going to flip the tables on them and keep them confused. Because like he said, continuing to emphasize, he took advantage of a crucial moment when the Lannisters thought that they were untouchable, pulled this off with the Tyrells, and now is in a position to benefit even more.
Well, it also comes down to, the idea that he had no motive, right? The Lannisters do not think that he would have done something like this, because betraying them at this moment would actually impact his wealth and power. And I think they underestimated him. It's like they kind of expected, because he, owned a lot of the bordellos in King's Landing, that he was basically just a man after wealth and lands, and wealth was his only motive. And so the fact that he, in terms of his bids for power, always supported the Lannisters, always did what they wanted, and just in exchange for wealth, I think they just thought they had him bought and that they didn't have to worry about him and they were safe. And the fact is, like, what he truly wants is he does want the wealth and whatnot, but he wants the power. And that's the one thing that they underestimated him with. And, you know, I think it's something that Sansa from this whole experience and later in the series will actually learn from. And she understands because he frankly tells her in these scenes what he's after. And so she knows that he just wants absolute power. And later on, you know, in the series during his downfall, like that's why Sansa is very quick to make a decision against him.
Absolutely.
You know, I think that again, I agree with you. I think this scene is great. I think it's.
I literally
fantastic.
had in parentheses after in this note right here. I said conversation between Littlefinger and Sansa. The mental chess match begins. That kind of carries all the way through until his inevitable death in season 7.
Well, all we see is him continuing to, you know, consolidate his power, and the main thing is we start to realize that he's had this plan since
for a while.
John Aaron, like he is the instigator of the Game of Thrones, and you know, it's amazing that he has played this like you know, third chair clarinet, so to speak, you know, like to everybody else, and has risen up and continues to rise up, and he sort of like figured out a way that he could potentially take the throne, you know, by being issued certain keeps and then marrying into you know, others, and really getting a vast amount of land under his control. And I do think he made a plan for Winterfell. You know, that's the whole point of you know, sending Sansa there, but like ultimately we'll never know because that plan didn't really go.
It didn't go the way that anyone was expecting. I don't think. Yeah. Two more notes that I have from that scene real quick. Olenna coaching Marjorie on how to properly seduce Tommen by telling her a story of how she seduced Marjorie's grandfather, which is that scene, you know, that she's pulling from her origins as a Bond girl back in the day in the 70s in one of the most underrated James Bond movies, On Her Majesty's Secret Service. And that scene is just the whole story of how she tells us of like how she foolishly stumbled her way into his room, and by the time she was done with him, he couldn't make his way down the stairs. She's like, I was good, I was very good, but you're better. Amazing, just incredible, more amazing. And the fact that this is the last that we see of her of this season until next season, it's unbelievable performance, continuing to emphasize why the Queen of Thorns is one of the best characters. And then Marjorie beginning her seduction of Tommen, which again, compared to Joffrey, Tommen's literal cake, she sneaks into his room without even bypassing the guards, like without even trying. She endears herself to him with Sir Pounce, and she's like, oh, you know that, you know, once we're married, I'm yours and you're mine. And again, already starting to endear him
well,
to her over
Sir
Cersei.
Pounce is the fact that Tommen is so obsessed over this cat. It's like
he loves it.
You know, it's really interesting, this character, right? Because they make him so innocent that
that he's useless.
Yeah, but it's almost like, is there a little bit of a learning disability type of thing, or is he just legitimately that young? And that sort of gullible, and like, you know, he just never had the chance to grow out of it because, you know, it's like all this tragic stuff happens to him. You know, so I think in terms of a character, like they don't really address Tommen that much. He sort of is sort of a pawn. That's sort of a background character for Cersei and Marjorie to kind of fight over.
He's a tool. That's all he is.
Yeah. So I don't know if he's like a fully fleshed out character, but like
another significant age change for the book. Tommen here again. That actor Gene Charles Chapman is my age. He would have probably been like 15, 16 when he was filming shooting this. Right. When the character in the books is still only like 9 years old. Like there's a lot of like drastic aging up of these characters that are supposed to be like children in the books.
Gotcha. Well, maybe that's what they plan on leaning towards and getting away with is just his youth. But like at the end of the day, like he's doesn't necessarily have the wisdom as Tywin would put it to really be a strong king. And you know, it's a very interesting arc because, you know, just in terms of what leads to his death. You know, it's he just can't really handle how dark the Game of Thrones is in the end.
Right, absolutely.
But I always find like they use him for like comedic effect. with Sir Pounce, and basically with the whole like, oh, this is our little secret, and how easily Marjorie, basically controls him from the beginning, even into the High Sept storyline, the Sparrow thing that happens next season. It's one of those things where he's in full control of someone else, or full influence of other people at all times. And his personality doesn't necessarily shine through in this world. And it's very interesting to sort of see that as a character over the course of a couple seasons.
Absolutely. Again, he's established as a person who really does not have a lot of agency on his own, and he's kind of just manipulated by everyone. Tywin in the last episode kind of coaching him on what makes a good king. Then now Marjorie in this episode kind of coaching him on, like, endearing him to her over Cersei. And again, just a whole lot of manipulation going on around. But who is also being manipulated here is Jaime. Jaime's another guy who, again, just cannot catch a fucking break. Every single chance, someone is trying to tell him, like, how to feel, what to do. First, he's training with Bronn. Bronn's like, have you been to see Tyrion and all that? After using another dirty trick in order to take him down with Jaime's got that smug look on his face, thinking he's going to win. Bronn rips off the golden hand, smacks him with it. It's absolutely amazing.
Well, I think Bronn and him strike up the conversation. Like, do you think he did it? And Bronn's like, no, that's not his way. Plus blah blah blah. And the fact is, like, why are you talking to me? Like, ask him yourself. And this is one of the interesting things, is that Bronn in this episode, has seemingly talked to Tyrion, because somehow he's giving this advice to Jaime, which could have been off the cuff, but also at the end when Podrick becomes Brienne's squire, he gifts him this axe, and he's like, oh, Tyrion wants you to have this, and it's like, is Bronn just getting rid of a murder weapon? Like, if Bronn wasn't allowed to see Tyrion, like, how is he gifting him this axe on behalf of Tyrion? So those are questions I have, because I was just like, Bronn seems a little like he might have snuck in. He might have had a little bit of a chat with Tyrion.
Maybe, yeah. Especially considering that we're supposed to believe that when Bronn does visit Tyrion, tell him that he won't represent him as his champion against the Mountain when he calls for trial by combat, that this is meant to be the first time that Tyrion's seen Bronn since being arrested. So I guess I see where your source of confusion comes from. But I think it comes down to the one scene that Bronn does tell Jaime, which is that we asked him, he's like, do you know how our brother, how we met, and he's like, you represented him for his trial by combat at the Eyrie, and he's like, that's only part of it. The only reason why I represented it was because because you couldn't be there, because he knew that you would ride day and night. Again, kind of continuing to emphasize, again, it's a thing that I love from this season, that Jaime and Tyrion are like the only two Lannister siblings that like actually do have some genuine care for each other, and actually like don't just want to, viciously murder and betray each other. And it leads to, again, a really like heartfelt and touching scene that they share in the jail cell, when they're kind of talking, and Jaime's trying to like throw a bunch of compliments his way, and Tyrion's like, oh, well, are we sure it's as good as you make it seem? And Jaime also relays that also in a scene that he had earlier with Cersei, where Cersei is, again, continuing to just devolve into paranoia. Again, Lena Headey's acting this season on fucking point, like, or just the way that she portrays Cersei's combination of her paranoia, her fear, her conniving nature, just the fact that she just doesn't trust anyone. She plays that to a T, and again, how she is able to still make you endeared for that character after all the despicable, awful things that she's done, and just from her sense as a mother, impeccable writing from that sense, and how. Like, I really feel bad for Jaime in this sense, where he's got to straddle these two lines between his brother, who he loves and understands is the black sheep of the family, but also doesn't 100% know if his brother actually committed this vicious act or not, and his sister, who is clearly melting down in front of her eyes, but is also his love in, more ways than one, and also who he knows is acting purely out of emotion and not necessarily out of any sense of logic or rationale. So Jaime's got to play this really weird balancing act that he's got right here. And even though he knows that—
I agree with you. So, like, when he sees Tyrion, basically they play the verbal joust game, and essentially at one point Tyrion's like, I think when Jaime asks, like, oh, hey, did you kill Joffrey? And he's like, the Kingslayer brothers, like,
it's got a nice ring to it.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, of course I didn't. And then it's, what does he say? Like, in response, it's like, what if I asked you, did you kill this person? He responds, I forgot exactly what it was. But Tyrion makes a big point back at Jaime, and Jaime sort of looks at him like, yeah, you're right, you know.
Right. Well, consistently also reminding Jamie is like, your king or your son, and like he's like, careful, like again, like that one little sensitive area that is like, yeah, Tyrion obviously knows their dirty little secret, and Jamie is.
He's blunt about it. Like Tyrion is like, straightforward in the scene, and I think that's one of the things. Is like, and it goes back to the Oberon stuff, where Oberon is about speaking straight. And so in this scene, between brothers, they are speaking straight to each other. And I think that's a characteristic that, of some of the powerful people in this world, that respect and speaking realistically and bluntly goes a long way in terms of the actual like honor that people exercise.
Right.
So, and they're allowed to do it. Like they have the ability to do it because they are playing the Game of Thrones in such a way where they are a little bit protected to a certain degree. Like Oberon is a prince of Dorne. The Lannisters need Dorne. So he's allowed to be blunt. He's allowed to sort of openly seek the mountain for revenge because, at the end of the day, his brother and his forces are needed to sort of secure the Seven Kingdoms. So like there's certain aspects of the game here that are very interested to see fleshed out, even just in a jail cell, in a conversation between these two guys.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. And it wraps up with, again, Cersei asked Jamie earlier, besides, asking her to kill Tyrion, which Tyrion, kind of like threw back at him when they were in the jail cell, before also telling him, when Jamie's like, that's where there's going to be a trial. And Tyrion's like, you're an idiot if you think that this is actually going to be a trial. He's like, this is nothing more than a show for both Cersei and father to condemn me to death, which is something that they've wanted to do for years now, since I was born. And it does lead Jamie to, but Cersei constantly poking and prodding Jamie to go and kill Sansa does make him, finally start to make one right decision to clean up his act, which again has been kind of hinted at and emphasized, that which is that he decides to ultimately entrust the second Valyrian steel sword to Brienne, as well as Podrick, and a new set of armor, and tells her to finish what he was ultimately unable to do, which is to go and fulfill her oath to find Lady Catelyn, to find Sansa. He's like, Arya's probably dead, but there's still a chance that Sansa is alive. Find her, bring her home, and Brienne does it.
Yeah. I think this is it's the scene starts with the whole, pages about Jamie, and just like the only thing that's really written about him is being the Kingslayer. And Brienne says like, that's, kind of sad, so, I don't know if she says it in those direct words, but it's like, it's kind of lame, Jamie. Like, you need, there's more to your tale. And, Jamie sort of agrees. And, and the whole point of the show is him redeeming himself away from that Kingslayer name. Like, the world won't let him do it, but he has to take action to be able to do so. And I think you're right. Like, he's sort of stuck in King's Landing, right. Between...
For better or for worse, no matter what he could potentially do to clean up his act, he unfortunately is still stuck in this position that he wants to maintain, this privileged position of as, like, Lord Commander of the Kingsguard.
Yeah, well, he also he's trying to keep his family together. He's trying to keep Tyrion alive. He's trying to keep Cersei to a certain degree, like, satisfied and like happy. Whatever the case may be. Like, I guess in terms of his father, he's trying to stay out of his father's way, but still keep the strength of the family. And he's in the middle of it. And I think, he sees there's no hope for him to leave King's Landing. Like, he has to be there to sort of try to broker this, impossible truce between the family. And I think that's one of the reasons why he gives Brienne the sword and says, go out there and do this, because he realizes that he can't do it. He doesn't have the ability to get away like Brienne does. Brienne can go out there, and that could be something that she focuses on.
Not to mention getting her also out of the way potentially for like a potential Cersei assassination setup as well.
Exactly.
So he's protecting her as well.
Yeah, and perfect chance for Podrick to escape. And I think the other thing that's great about, all great swords have names, or whatever, that's what they say. And she decides to name it Oathkeeper. This is one of those things where she is, basically, yes, the sword's called Oathkeeper, and she's going to go and she's going to be an extension of Jamie, and she's going to live up to the oath and protect Sansa, at least, the Stark girls, so to speak. So if Brienne succeeds and she does, uphold the oath, by extension, that was because of Jaime, and that will, in essence, maybe this is reading too much into it, but that will change him from the Kingslayer to someone that keeps his oath.
I don't necessarily know. I don't necessarily know if that's reading too much into it, but I do like the idea as far as again, because I've read into the scene a lot as far as what it could potentially mean. But I like that idea of again, kind of Jaime accepting his lot in life, but also maybe more so projecting some more of the good things that he may want to do that he may have learned last season with his time in Brienne by projecting it onto somebody who doesn't have as much baggage on them as he does ultimately. So now,
but I think this particular sequence of events with Brienne sets up this idea that his story does not just have to be about the Kingslayer, and that the actions that he personally takes, the people that he actually influences, like Brienne, these are going to lead to positive things. And at the end of the day, something else will be written in those pages.
Yes.
I think it's sort of obviously, going through and seeing the entire series, we know that kind of comes back, but for the most part, I think it's a really good setup, and it really sets up this, a little bit of a sort of a romantic idea in the minds of the audience.
Indeed, as we come to see later on. But so now we cut to the north. We got two major storylines that happen here. Again, two primary setup storylines, but for some gangbusters, resolutions in the midpoint. Next episode, we have Jon, who is training new recruits, some of which include Ollie. He's doing another mock sword fight with Gren in order to, again, trying to prep them as best he can for the wildlings. Thorne comes in, breaks it up. Again, Thorne does not know when to call it quits with Jon. Even when they're at war, he just has to throw shit at Jon every chance that he gets. He doesn't trust Jon. He still thinks that Jon is with the wildlings. He doesn't believe Aemon's claim that Jon is there to help them. And again, he even says it. He's like, go ahead. Give me a reason. Mormont's not here to protect you, again, showing he never liked him from the beginning. But the one thing that is established after the fact, which again, it's a good thing that Thorne has Janos Slynt on his side, is that Thorne is not a politician. Thorne is blunt. Thorne is headstrong. And Thorne, for better or for worse, does believe in the Watch, but he is not a politician and he does not know how to play the game. But Janos Slynt, dumb as a rock as he is, does have some slight experience in politics in King's Landing. And he sees after the fact, after Thorne, makes his claim, he's like, yeah, you're being a little bit too brash. And Jon is very, very well liked. And he also knows that once they finish up the war, Thorne says, I don't care, we're at war. And he's like, yeah, but we're not going to be at war forever. And when we do, there's going to be a new election for the Lord Commander. And it might be better off.
Well, Aemon's going to push for it, right? He says the old man's going to push for it. So, he's going back to his old ways, right? Of being sort of, this schemer that's trying to cement his, power as a second in command. And so, the thing that got him sent up to the wall in the first place, he just can't help himself. He's doing the same stuff. And ultimately, it didn't work out the first time, and I don't think it's going to work out the second time either.
Yeah, unfortunately, it has become this thing. Yeah, but at the very least, for now, it does work because Janos's words do successfully convince Thorne to greenlight the mission. But first, before Jon meets up with Locke, who again has gone completely undercover, almost to the point where he almost fooled you into thinking that he was just another Night's Watch recruit. And what's crazy about that is I had almost the exact same thought process the first time I saw him, where because there had been an episode break between when Bolton first sent Locke out in order to find Bran in episode 2, and then we had so much that happened in the last episode between the immediate reaction to Joffrey's death, and now we get back. I almost completely forgot that. I'm like, oh yeah, Locke was sent up to the wall again. Another thing completely original to the show. Again, Locke is not a character that exists in the books at all. There is no sort of Bolton infiltration that happens. Completely original to the show. I
think it's one of those things where it would have been cooler if he's, he sent back a crow and it's like, oh, I've got in the Night's Watch. Jon trusts me, all this stuff. There's some a little, it might have been cheesy. It might not have been really necessary, but ultimately the Locke storyline, he's just sort of gone rogue. Roose promised him some land. And so he comes up here looking for Bran and Rickon. and just sort of ends up dead. And I think later,
weird and random how it turns out. Like,
yeah, I think there's a scene later on, like Roos and Ramsey are just like, whatever happened to that Locke guy? It's like, I don't know.
They're like, where'd he go? They kind of just forget about him. I don't know.
Yeah, so I think it's to me, it's almost an unfulfilled storyline. Like, obviously,
first of many.
I'll correct myself from earlier. I said there's not much of, it's not much of an arc. It's not an arc, but it is an arc. It's just not that good of a one, so like, I think the potential for Locke going up there, like he comes in, he seems like a pretty, bad, ass fighter, so to speak. And,
right.
And
well, he shows that out of all the recruits, he actually knows what he's doing with this. He knows how to handle a sword. Makes up some bullshit cockamamie story that John completely buys into. Very, very similar to the story that like Pip told him originally back in season 1. Again, endearing to him. Again, I even had this written as a note as well, where I'm like, wow, Locke is such a good liar that he even fooled. Hang on, where is it? I'm like, oh yeah, Locke is also an incredible liar like Ramsey. I'm like, wow, Locke is such a good liar that he even fools the audience.
Yeah, no, I think, it's, I don't know why I never picked it up on it before, and watching it today, I'm just like, oh my God, Locke is, he's here. This is him,
yeah.
But like the fact is, I think the storyline could have been tied back to the Boltons, a little more, like maybe after, Locke gets killed, there's something,
right, there's something
that John could find on his body or something like that would that
even
could
if implicate him, something to hint at it, rather than have it just be Bran who knows that he's bad, but he's dead, but he can't meet up with John because John could potentially forestall his journey to Threadripper. It's so weird. It's the example of, okay, we kind of need this character out of the way. We don't really know what purpose it would serve to keep him alive, even though we sent him up here with it's kind of a mess.
I guess they give him a side mission which he dies on, but like
right.
It just sort of doesn't seem like there's any implication ultimately to it. I think it's
not to mention the fact it's like, so wait, you're going to carry Bran all the way to the wall, avoid the Night's Watch and the Wildling completely, make your way through Castle Black and the wall. Like there's so many plot holes in that plan as far as the logistics of it, but it does lead to two of my possible favorite sequences in this entire season. First, Sir Alistair greenlighting the mission and John giving his speech to the Night's Watch, getting them together because, of course, Thorne has to throw a fuck you towards John any chance he get where he's like, I'll greenlight your mission, but I won't sanction it. So I won't force anyone to go. Okay. Volunteers only. And he's like, fine. And he makes this incredible, beautiful speech about how it's like, again, like the logistics of why they have to do this. They have to kill these mutineers because if the wildlings get to them, they could drastically, give them the edge they need in order to win the war because they still think that the Night's Watch has way more members than they actually do. And obviously these renegades know the truth. And also, more than that, again, he manages to garner the spirit of he channels the spirit of Mormont into them. He's like, yeah, Lord Commander Mormont gave his life for the Watch, and these cowards stabbed him in the back, for what,
They're also drinking out of his skull, wine, which is very...
If that's actually true, if that's actually Mormont's skull, like once we cut up to the Renegades North, again, first time we've seen them since the end of last season. Again, completely original. For all I know, in the books, those guys are still just living up there, chatting happily, casually raping Craster's women, all that stuff.
Well, it's kind of really bizarre because like, what's their long-term strategy here? Like,
right.
It's like the group of them cannot really live like Craster because, there's a lot more of them. Obviously, right. They're gonna have children, with these women.
Right.
It's like the other thing is like they're all sort of religious zealots, and they have one, male child that was like, I guess, born a couple of days ago, and so after they took over, so like. The women are muttering to themselves, something about for the gods or whatever. Gift to the Gods, I think it
Right.
was. But ultimately they kind of clue him in, like, you got to go offer up this baby to the White Walkers, and they decide in sort of a drunken moment, like, yeah, why not, like, get rid of one more mouth, we don't need to feed it.
And of course he has Rast do it, because Rast, he's basically made his whipping boy, even though Rast, you can see the look on his face. Rast just never looks happy, first off, in anything that he's doing, even though Rast is the scumbag who actually put the knife in Mormont's back last season, but Rast is just completely miserable. He knows that this is not a good plan long term. He knows that they're not going to last. And I think they kind of all know that, and that's kind of why they're just enjoying like this kind of last thrill ride, just just embellishing in all this hedonism, all these carnal acts, because they know they're dead. They know they're not making it through. They're like, look, if the wildlings don't get us, then the White Walkers will. They know the stakes at the very least. And again, your guy, Burn Gorman, gives one of the most impassioned monologues. Again, the antithesis to John, where John is all about, putting others before yourself, serving for the cause, but believing in something bigger than yourself. And Carl Tannen is the complete opposite of that, in that he's all about, his own personal glory, embellishing himself, how great of a cutthroat he was, the fact that every time somebody gave him silver in King's Landing, that person who he was paid to kill never saw the light of day, kind of embellishing
I think
his own legacy.
It comes down to, like, the knights he met in the taverns, right, and how he could beat them all, and
right,
he kind of goes on, a little bit of a drunken stupor, and ultimately, I think part of the best part of this is, like, he just is sort of he's bored. Right. He's kind of angry at the world. He's drunk, and when they finally do capture Bran and the gang, basically he intimidates them to revealing who they are. And it's like, as soon as he, Brandon tells him, like, oh, I'm Brandon Stark, he just, like, says, oh, and I thought today was going to be a boring day. It's like all the other stuff was like entertainment.
He's the best. That guy is, I love that actor. Burn Gorman, amazing.
Yeah, it's you're taking a character that's as you put it, wasn't really meant to be anything, and you're making it real.
Yes.
The like 2-3 episodes or whatever that they're in, I think his acting really makes a statement and makes this Mutineer storyline, have a lot of gravitas, and it's something that's actually pretty fun this season.
I agree. And bringing it back to Bran as well. Bran, again, hears the sounds of the screaming baby. Again, Rast, first of all, it's like, I do think I had this right here where it's like, okay, Rast does bring up one good point, which is that I'm like, why are they keeping ghosts alive? Like, just from a logistical standpoint, I'm like, bro, you have a direwolf that's going to kill any one of you at any minute, and you're keeping it in a cage. Terrible idea right there. That's a little bit of a nitpick that I have right there. And
ultimately, I think they would, they would probably try to eat the wolf,
right? Exactly. They
food is scarce.
They benefit. They stand to benefit nothing from keeping ghosts alive. So that's like kind of plot hole number one. I also had to point it out there again when Bran hears. Again, I haven't pointed out that Jojen is consistently looking sicker and weaker in the book. Obviously, we know that Jojen unfortunately meets his untimely end at the end of this season. But it's interesting where even though he's still alive in the books, he seems to be suffering very physically. We obviously know from his seizure condition, but also because of the fact that, again, I talked about this before, where it seems that the more in touch with his green seer powers Bran is becoming, the weaker the Jojen is becoming. And I'm wondering if there was some sort of like symbiosis thing with the green seer magic that maybe got left off the table there. But also another quick point, this is the only direwolf reunion that we actually get in the show after, Summer and Shaggy Dog unfortunately say goodbye to each other last season, where Bran wargs into Summer, they're going towards the baby, but then he hears Ghost howling. He goes towards Ghost and he falls into the trap. And then, obviously, they go to the Night's Watch encampment. Mira sees the Night's Watchmen having their way with the women, realizes immediately what's going on, and then she's like, okay, we need to go, because, again, Bran is still, like, a little bit young and naive, but Mira knows exactly what's going on. Like, the look in her face says it all. She's walking away, again, like, kind of casually walking. Look, the way that I see it, look, every time somebody is, it's one of those many, many tropes that I've noticed from movies and TV shows before. Anytime that somebody's walking towards a tree, but has their head turned, like, something bad is going to happen. And of course, a Renegade Night's Watcher comes out, smacks the butt of their axe right into their face, captures all the rest of them, brings them before Carl. They're bullying Hodor, and Jojen.
Well, the best line is like, if I was as big as you, I would be king, you know,
right.
like.
And also another one of my favorite lines where Carl is like pointing out that when he smacks Bran in the face, he's like, and he immediately figures out that Bran is a High Lord. It's like, yeah, you're wearing fine leather, you know. He's like, now where I come from, you know, I lose my right hand for smacking a little lord like you, but we're a long way from the wall. And finally forces Bran to admit who he is. And then Rast tells him, you know, that's Jon's brother. That's a valuable hostage right there. And he's like, all right, interesting, you know. And so obviously, again, setting up, we know where that's going to go. We know the Night's Watch members are going to come. We know that they're going to plow through the Renegades. The Renegades are not long for this world. So I guess just props to the writers for giving them so much interesting and colorful space as far as wrapping that up. But we have one final scene to tie it together, which, again, is like arguably the most important moment of this entire episode, where we finally get the revelation of the night and the introduction of the Night King, you know, portrayed in this one episode by Richard Brake. But also, and I don't know, Pat, I wanted to talk to you about this for a little bit. You know, we're almost out of time here, but like, do you think that this scene that we get to kind of end this episode, because for me, it's still like just sent shivers down my spine, pun intended, every single time that I watch it. But do you think that this scene properly, adequately, like kind of explains how White Walkers are created? Because to me, the fact that they accomplished this scene with absolutely no dialogue, you know, that one White Walker taking the baby to that strange ice fortress, placing it on the table, you have the beautiful shot of like the blurred out focus of all the walkers in the background, and then the one walking up, and it slowly, you know, goes into focus. You see him picking up the baby.
Yeah, I think, you know, I really like this introduction because, again, it's kind of like a creepy ceremony, and it sets up this ominous, like, bad guy that kind of hovers over the whole entire story. I think that succeeds, right? This moment really does set up, like, the ultimate endgame evil. However,
obviously, given the execution of where it ends, that being completely different.
Well, it's like the baby's eyes turn blue, and then we never see this baby again. So,
right, I mean,
like, you're supposed to believe he grows up into like a 40-year-old
right, that he grows
White
up
Walker.
and become like a White Walker thing. Yeah, I mean, again, it's White Walkers, it's magic, it's sorcery, so I usually take those with a grain of salt. We don't know what exactly the aging process for White Walkers is, you know. But I don't know. I just thought that like the fact that was something that was really never even like explained or hinted at in the books. Like we haven't even gotten to the point where the Children of the Forest even give any mention of the fact that they were behind the creation of the White Walkers, which we learn obviously in season 6. Once we kind of come back to this storyline, but I don't know. I just still think it's really striking. It's really visually interesting. The fact that they were like trying to give us at least something, you know, regardless of where it goes in the end. I just thought it was really interesting. Them giving us just a little bit of a hint, you know. It's like, okay, we obviously know there are more White Walkers, you know.
In my mind, they put this baby Walker in the crib, and then they go and watch this whole war, and then they die south of the wall, and the baby's just in the crib and melts. You know, like there's no transformation process, I guess.
Maybe like an accelerated aging thing because of magic.
Yeah, you know, it might have been a cool scene to just like have a American Werewolf in London transformation,
right? Like maybe like a montage,
demon baby to.
Like that. I get that.
But you know, whatever. I guess it's not really needed. But like ultimately, you know, maybe from my love of sci-fi and you know, David Cronenberg movies, you know, there's a lot of potential left on the table that you know, this scene doesn't actually lead to in the next few episodes or our next season.
Yes, unfortunately. Yeah, but so that's it. That's our recap and review of season 4, episode 4, entitled Oathkeeper. We got another banger of an episode next week, so make sure you guys keep tuning in for new episodes. We're already at the midpoint next week. It never ceases to amaze me how fast we plow through these episodes, but that's just how good these episodes are. That's just how bingeable this show is. And again, I love that we're continuing to do this journey, continuing to emphasize and relive the great moments of the show, showing that the last season may have been a fluke, may not have been. We'll get back to it. Pat, as always, where can the good people find you?
Hey, listen, you know, obviously you can find me here on the Talkin TV podcast, you know, Talking Thrones with Dom. Or you can check out my Instagram that I am threatening your audience that I'll post one day, you know, at Patrick W. Huber on Instagram. You know, hey, subscribe and, you know, maybe one day you'll see that next post.
Maybe one day. But until that day, we'll keep staying tuned. Of course, follow me at Movie Nerd Reviews on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Letterboxd, serialize at Movie Nerd Reviews, and also be sure to follow us on the official Talkin TV Podcast Instagram page at official Talkin TV Podcast, Facebook, and Instagram. We'll be back next week, season 4, episode 5. In the meantime, stay frosty, people. 12 seasons in a short film, and watch more fucking movies. See you guys.
Keep more oaths, man.
Keep more oaths.